Hello and welcome to this week's IG Live. Today I am talking to Lisa Stringfellow. I'm very excited to talk to her about her middle grade fantasy books. One was inspired by Caribbean culture and folklore, and her new one is inspired by West Africa. So we're going to talk about how she goes about world building and why this kind of representation is so important for young readers. We're here every week. We come to you usually on Thursdays at this time. Hello. And talk to the movers and the shakers in the world of diverse children's literature. That's authors, but sometimes we also have illustrators. We've even interviewed publishers. So do be sure to join us. Watch for those announcements just in case we have a change in time. Every once in a while we need to do that. And hello. And like I said, today we are going to be, I thought I would have it today, and it's not in my library yet. So I believe she'll have some copies that she can show us. But as I mentioned, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Well, I was just mentioning, I wish I had a copy of one of your books to show, but I know you will. And I'm excited to talk to you because it seems like we have a lot of picture book authors that we get to talk to, but I think middle grade is such an exciting age of books and such a great time period to explore. So I'm excited to talk to you about yours and also fantasy books. So we'll get into that. But before we get started, maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell us what was your journey to becoming an author.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today. So I'm Lisa Stringfellow. I'm a middle grade author of 2 books. My first, the debut was A Comb of Wishes, which I have right here. Comb of Wishes came out in 2022. It's a fantasy set in the Caribbean about a girl who finds a mermaid's comb. And my second book came out just this August, Kingdom of Dust, which is a West African inspired fantasy about a girl who has to save her kingdom. And so I'm excited to talk. I'm also a teacher, and so today, this is Spirit Week, I was telling you earlier. And so my department, I'm an English teacher in the middle school, and we'd all dressed it up as the theme was local legends. And so we were Edgar Allan Poe. So I had my Poe mustache on earlier today. But yeah, it's super fun to be here to talk about what I do.
Well, did you always think that you were going to write? I mean, like you said, you're a teacher. Was it just kind of a hobby, or did you have in mind that no, this is something I want to dedicate myself to?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a reader. And so even as a child, I loved books. I lived in the library. You know, the librarians would save books for me that they thought I would enjoy.
Oh.
And so when I became a teacher, you know, that kind of was a natural flow, but I never really thought about writing, you know, for publishing for a really long time until I went back to graduate school, you know, after I'd begun my career and started taking classes. And I did an audit of my classroom libraries for an assignment and realized how few books I had that were written by authors of color, kind of about their experiences just in all genres. And I had a friend who just kind of said, well, you know, maybe you should write a book. And I was like, oh, maybe I should. You know, I could do that. And so that kind of started my journey maybe about like 15 years ago. And I started taking craft classes and joined organizations, you know, that, you know, could teach me and I could learn from, especially about writing for children. And so, yeah, it took a long time. My first book that I wrote, Comb of Wishes, actually started as a project that I wrote with my students for National Novel Writing Month. And from when I started that in 2013, it was about 9 years until it was actually a real book out in the world. So, you know, it's something that makes sense to me now, but I didn't start off thinking, yeah, I want to be an author. I just, you know, I knew I was always a reader, but now it's kind of like a combination of the two things that I've always loved.
Well, And I was going to ask if your students knew that you were an author. So I guess at least that class did.
That, yeah, when Comb of Wishes came out, the kids that I had had in fifth grade when I began that story were college freshmen. So it's how long the process takes. But my students now, they do know, that I'm a writer. That some of these books that have come through, it takes so long. Kids, like, I'll show pieces of my writing to them, and we're talking already about novel writing for the challenge in November of this year. And my students have already asked, can we help you with your idea? And I'm like, I would love some help. So, yes, definitely it helps to be a teacher of the students of the age that I'm writing for, especially.
And what a great experience for them. We talk a lot about the importance of representation, and here they're getting to see someone they know and that they can relate to being an author. That I'm sure that has a big part in inspiring them as well.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I never met an author when I was a kid growing up. I didn't know that like an author is like a job, or, I knew that, people wrote these books that I love, but, I never met any as a real person. So I definitely hope that I inspire some of them to write.
Well, tell us more about your new book, Kingdom of Dust, which I should mention is a Junior Library Guild Gold Standard selection. So what was your
Yeah.
inspiration?
Yeah, so this book was just, it kind of sparked out of something that happened in the classroom. So obviously, as an English teacher, we read a lot together. And one year we were reading The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Ovi, which is a historical book set in the 1830s about a girl who goes from being, very prim and proper, and the only woman on this ship that's setting sail across the Atlantic. And by the end, she's part of the crew, and she's climbing the sails, and she's like kind of like the hero of the story. And in prepping for reading that, I, showed the kids a video about kind of like girl empowerment. It was a commercial, and in the video there was a girl who said, girls are never the ones who like rescue someone in a tower. And I just thought that was like such an interesting little idea. And I was like, yeah, why not? And so that kind of was like the seed of the stories. I wanted to write um, a girl in the tower type story, a princess in the tower story, but have a girl be the one that goes on this quest to find this person that could help. So that was like the beginning. I knew I wanted it to be a fairy tale because I've always loved fairy tale stories like Rapunzel and all of those things. And then getting to the setting of it being inspired in like a West African medieval setting took a while. The very first drafts of the story didn't look like the current form at all. It was kind of more of a like a stereotypical medieval type setting. And I just wasn't really connecting with the characters. And I had, funny enough, a opportunity to talk to the author Gail Carson Levine, who wrote Ella Enchanted and all of these wonderful fairy tale books. She did through a conference a red pencil session with me where I shared the first couple of pages of my draft, and she gave me a little bit of feedback, and I explained this problem I was having with not connecting with the character, and she said, well, medieval is a time period, it's not a place. And like it was like a simple truth that like I hadn't really thought about, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm trying to put it in this like European setting, like that's not fitting what I'm imagining. And so I picked the story up and I moved it to West Africa, and suddenly all of these pieces started to fall into place, and I started to pull in connections from like Igbo mythology. So there's an earth goddess, and she's based on the Igbo goddess Allah. And so all of these things started coming once I started figuring out where this story was and then who would the characters be. So yeah, I'm really super excited with it.
Well, tell us more about that process of world building, because I am fascinated by that. When I read these fantasy novels, and there's so much detail, so in some ways like so much more work you have to do to create this world that the characters are living in, and also how you reveal that to the reader so it's not overwhelming. I think we've all read some kind of badly written fantasy books where you're reading it and it's just so much information. It's so hard to picture where you are, you know. So how do you go about doing that and first creating the world and then how you kind of reveal it to the reader?
Yeah, it's like through a lot of drafts. So, basically, like you have that instinct to like, want to info dump all of this information, and you do have to reveal it to the readers like a little bit more gradually.
Mm.
I think for me, like what you touched on is like was a challenge at first because this is a book set in a world that's not like ours. It's kind of a totally different time and different place. And A Comb of Wishes, as contrast, was like a contemporary fantasy set, kind of in present day in the Caribbean, but just has mermaids in it. And so writing that story had world building too, but it was in some ways a little easier because it, was our world. And so I decided to write an island that was very similar to Barbados, because that's where my dad was born in Barbados and his family was from. And so I based, and that was like a personal connection because like I knew the food and I knew the culture and I knew the sounds. And even though I grew up here in the United States, like there was a lot of familiar elements to that. Um, in Kingdom of Dust, it was very different. So I had to kind of work from my imagination, but I also did like a lot of research. I wanted to make sure that even though this is a fictional world, I did, a lot of like looking into like the setting. And so for example, this kingdom of Kun that I created kind of has connections to like the kingdoms of Benin. There's like a big city that my main character Amara travels to at one point that's surrounded by humongous walls. And so like the Great Walls of Benin are like an amazing structure that was built. So there's like real world elements that, I pulled in through like the research of like, this place, even though I was fictionalizing it and drawing inspiration from it. But I think just like what you said, revealing things kind of as the reader needs to know them is like an important thing to not overwhelm them, and just give them what they need to know at the time they need to know it, and
Yeah.
sprinkling those details in.
Right, right. And I'm wondering, like you're talking about the research that you did, and when you have those elements of, say, that are inspired by actual culture, actual history, was it hard to decide, okay, what am I going to keep and what am I going to change? Or did that come pretty naturally as far as seeing what fit into the story that you had in mind?
Yeah, no, I definitely, and I tend to write somewhat like thinly in my early drafts. So like I will work through something and I'll get like the skeleton of the story kind of figured out. And then I have to go back and like, flesh it out and add the detail and add the layers. And so I'm more often thinking like, what do I need to add rather than what do I need to take out? But sometimes it's also like what's working here and what's not working here. With the characters, I decided that even though like, West African inspired is broad. And so in my research and thinking, I started narrowing it down to make it more culturally specific, with Igbo mythology. I didn't want to mix and match like different beliefs, even though again, it's all like inspiration for a fantasy. So like even the names of the characters, I changed as drafts went on because I'm like, you know what, I need to be consistent and like this word they're using, should be based on an Igbo word, and this name should be an Igbo name and not, Yoruba or something else. So, yeah, definitely taking layers and going through and working, and seeing what works.
And tell us more about why fantasy? Was that just a genre that you really enjoyed or reading yourself, or do you find that that's a great way to explore different themes? Why did you choose that, especially for middle grade?
Yeah, a little bit of both. And it's funny because as a teacher, I have a lot of parents who will say, like, oh, all my child wants to read is fantasy. Like, can you suggest some other things for them? And I'm like, well, yes, but there's fantasy is great. And so for me, yes, fantasy was the genre that I loved as a kid. I mean, I read lots of different things, but I especially loved, books like The Chronicles of Narnia and, Wrinkle in Time. So like I always was a big lover of fantasy. And I think as a writer, what I find most fun about it is that you can be like, for example, both of my books, one is contemporary realistic fantasy and the other, or contemporary in our present day, even though it's magical, and then the other is set in a different world. And so you can still you know speculate about ideas and what ifs, whether it's grounded in our world or grounded in some world that's very different to ours. And I think it's like a way, to explore ideas that, we can be a little bit metaphorical. And so, like, when kids are reading them, they're like, this is totally different from my experience, but like the characters are going through same things that are similar to things that I've noticed in my own like life. And so the ways the characters solve problems, like there's a lot of connections to like, individuals that we can make from those things just told through metaphor. And so I think, I'm all for fantasy, and I don't think, I think everybody should read what they love. I think that's, the fastest way to, crush a beginning reader is to tell them what they can't read. But I think there's also a lot of benefit because there's so much thinking that you do based on the things that the story brings that, that we can apply to our own world and life.
Right. Right, definitely. And I was also, just talking about this idea of the storytelling and the imagination. I love the epigraph to your book, which was a West African proverb: "When a griot dies, it is as if a library has been burned to the ground." And so, what do you hope that readers take away from an understanding about storytelling, the importance of understanding the past, and how it informs the present?
I think that as I'm, this is my second book, and so I'm kind of developing my voice as a writer and developing kind of like what the things that are important to me. And so a thread that runs through both books is this the importance of community and the importance of history. And so in this particular book, that quote connects to the fact that the griots, and griots are like real people who exist and live today, who basically are like the keepers of history for the communities that they live in. And so they do it through poetry and music and, performance. And in the book, they're just also magicians. And so, but as they disappear, the people begin to forget the past, forget kind of like where they came from. And that's like the impetus for the desert that starts to take over everything. And so I think the idea that, you have to, know your past and like have a connection to the history of, where you are and who you are with, to bring that into the present and like make decisions going forward. And so I think that's one of the things I hope readers get from the story, is that like we're all connected and we're all part of the communities that we live in, and that, we have a responsibility to, remember the past and also, acknowledge and take accountability for things, and then also bring that forward and make decisions for like the betterment of everyone in the future.
Right, right. That's something I think that would be good for a lot of people to keep in mind, for adults too.
Yeah.
And I also want to talk about representation, because I noticed when you were listing the books that you really enjoyed when you were a kid, a lot of them are by white authors or based in Europe, as of course we know. And you said that now you write for your 12-year-old self, the kid waiting to be the brown-skinned hero of an adventure off saving the world. So can you talk a little bit more about why books like yours are so important, having that kind of representation that we didn't have when we were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like I said, I love to read and I read voraciously as a kid. And, but I found that the books that I loved, I didn't see myself reflected in very often. And I think, that's the issue that still unfortunately happens today with many kids. Like if things are better, and like there's definitely more voices on the bookshelves and more, but I think about even today, like as a teacher, I'm teaching a novel called Strong as Fire, Fierce as Flame by Supriya Kelkar, which is a wonderful historical novel about India. And the students that I have who are South Asian, they're just so happy to be reading this book. And they'll say things like, her family, like they're preparing this dish and like, my mom loves to make that, or a holiday that's being celebrated, or just other little details. And they'll tell me about the conversations that they went home and they had with their families about the book. And so I think every child needs to have those moments where they read something, whether it's just a book that they're reading for pleasure or a book that they're reading as part of, their classroom experience, where they see some element of themselves. It might be like a cultural representation. It might be, language. It might be something else, family structure, all sorts of different things. But that moment of like having the opportunity to see a mirror, and we talk a lot about windows and mirrors in my classroom as well. And so I think, everybody needs to have that. And so that's kind of one of the things that I love about writing, because I'm hoping, someone who was like me as a kid, who never had a book about a Caribbean character, or never had a book that they saw that was a fairy tale with like a Black girl as the hero, will have it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're having these conversations with your students, that you're helping them to be a little more aware of the books they're reading and who's writing them. Because I think that I don't think we really had, I don't remember my teachers ever having those conversations with us when I was growing up. So I think that's really amazing too.
Thank you.
And do you want to take some time, because I'm just looking at the time, do you want to tell us some about any upcoming projects or what you have in the works? I know, you talk about how long it is from when you start writing to when they publish. So I know you just had a book come out. So
Yeah, I
know.
No, I mean, I'm writing and I'm working on works in progress. I don't have anything that's in the publishing pipeline quite yet, but I'm hoping I do soon. So my next book, I'm going back to middle grade fantasy, but with a little bit of the dark twist again. So Comb of Wishes was nominated for a Bram Stoker award. So middle grade horror, even though it's more fantasy, I feel like, than horror, but it's definitely, the mermaid is creepy. So the next book that I'm working on kind of goes back to those roots a little bit, because I love a good spooky story. So yeah, hopefully that, and I'm actually thinking about some picture book ideas. So definitely more to come.
Oh, that'll be interesting to do picture books. Was that something you had thought of, or you just thought, well, I'll give it a try?
No, I mean, as I said, I love so many things about all different books. I think I definitely started with the kind of books that I loved, like where my heart would be. And so that was where middle grade came from. But I feel like there's so much to learn about each different age category. So, I kind of delayed picture books because that's a whole new craft to learn. So I'm definitely, I'm loving the ability to go back and forth between projects. So yeah, hopefully that'll be something that I can talk about soon.
Well, we look forward to that, and for announcements for any new books or projects you have coming up, we'll be sure to share in our stories. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. It was so fun to talk with you.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks everybody. As always, this will be up in a few minutes on Instagram, and later we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. Bye everybody.
Bye.